Hey there, friends. Get ready, because I'm about to tell you a story that's wild and fun. It's all about pumpkins, a sneaky lady named Karen, and a big surprise that made everyone laugh. This story starts in my little neighborhood, a place where I thought everyone was nice. I'm just a regular guy who loves growing pumpkins in my backyard. Big, orange, perfect pumpkins, they're my favorite thing every fall. I water them, I talk to them, and I watch them grow big and round. They're like my little buddies, and I feel so proud when I see them sitting there, all bright and happy in my garden. But then, there was Karen. Oh, Karen. She lived 2 houses down from me, in a little white house with a red door. She had curly hair and always wore big sunglasses, even when it wasn't sunny. At first, I didn't think much about her. She seemed okay, you know. She'd walk by my house sometimes, and if I was outside watering my pumpkins, she'd wave and say, "Hi," in a loud voice. I'd wave back and smile, thinking she was just being friendly. I'm a guy who likes to get along with people, so I didn't wonder too much about her. I was busy with my pumpkins, making sure they had enough water and sunshine to grow strong. But here's the thing, Karen wasn't what she seemed. Want to know a secret? She wasn't as nice as I thought. Nope, not even a little bit. She had a sneaky side, and I didn't see it coming. Not at first. I was too busy loving my pumpkins and enjoying my quiet days. My neighborhood is a cozy place, with green grass, tall trees, and kids riding bikes up and down the street. The houses are small, and everyone knows each other. We say hi, we chat about the weather, and sometimes we share cookies or lemonade. It's a happy spot, or at least I thought it was. I never imagined someone like Karen would cause trouble. But oh boy, was I wrong. Let me tell you more about my pumpkins, because they're a big part of the story. Every fall, when the leaves turn orange and yellow, I start planting pumpkin seeds. I dig little holes in the dirt, drop the seeds in, and cover them up with a soft pad. Then I wait. Days go by, and soon tiny green sprouts poke out of the ground. I get so excited. I water them every day, and I pull out any sneaky weeds that try to grow nearby. Those weeds are like little thieves, trying to steal the sunshine from my pumpkins, and I don't let them. Nope, I'm the pumpkin protector. After a few weeks, the sprouts turn into vines, long and twisty, stretching across my backyard. Then, little green balls start to grow on those vines. At first, they're small, like tennis balls, but they keep getting bigger and bigger. I watch them every day, smiling as they turn from green to orange. By October, they're perfect, big, round, and shiny. Some are so heavy I can barely lift them. I like to sit on my back porch with a cup of hot cocoa and just look at them. They make me happy. I even give them names sometimes, like Big Bob or Sunny Sue. Silly, right? But that's how much I love them. My neighbors like my pumpkins too. Sometimes they stop by and say, "Wow, those are amazing." One time, my friend Mike from across the street asked if he could have one for his kids to carve for Halloween. I said, "Sure," and handed him a nice, round one. He smiled big and said thanks, and later I saw his kids drawing funny faces on it with a marker. That made me feel good. I like sharing when people ask nicely. Sharing is fun, and it makes everyone happy. But Karen? She didn't ask. Not even once. And that's where the trouble started. See, I thought she was just a regular neighbor, someone who liked to wave and say hi. I didn't know she had her eye on my pumpkins. I didn't know she'd been watching them grow, just like me, but for a very different reason. While I was watering and weeding and smiling at my orange buddies, Karen was making a plan. A sneaky, sneaky plan. She didn't care that those pumpkins were mine. She didn't care that I worked hard to grow them. To her, they were just free stuff she could take whenever she wanted. The first time I noticed something funny was on a chilly morning. I woke up, put on my jacket, and went outside to check on my pumpkins, like I always do. The air smelled like leaves and apples, and the sun was just peeking over the trees. I walked to my garden, humming a little song, and then I stopped. Something was wrong. One of my pumpkins was gone. Just, gone. There was an empty spot where Big Bob used to sit. I looked around, thinking maybe the wind blew it away or a squirrel dragged it off. But that didn't make sense. Big Bob was heavy, way too heavy for a squirrel or the wind. I scratched my head and frowned. That's weird, I said to myself. I walked around the yard, looking under bushes and behind the fence, but Big Bob was nowhere. I even checked the street, thinking maybe a kid took it as a prank. Nope. Nothing. I went back inside, feeling a little sad. I didn't know what happened, but I told myself it was just one pumpkin. I still had lots more, like Sunny Sue and Little Pete. Maybe it was a mystery I'd never solve. But then it happened again. The next day, I went outside, and another pumpkin was missing. This time it was Sunny Sue, one of my prettiest ones with a perfect orange color. I stared at the empty spot, my mouth open. What's going on? I said out loud. 2 pumpkins gone in 2 days? That wasn't normal. I started to feel a little mad. Those were my pumpkins. I grew them from tiny seeds, and now they were disappearing. I didn't like that one bit. That's when I saw Karen. I was standing by my fence, looking at the empty spots, when she walked by. She had her big sunglasses on and a scarf around her neck. She waved at me and said, "Morning," in her loud voice. I waved back, but I noticed something funny. She was carrying a bag, a big cloth one, and it looked heavy. Something orange was poking out the top. My eyes got wide. Was that a pumpkin? My pumpkin? I couldn't be sure, but my tummy felt funny, like when you know something's not right. "Karen," I called out. "Did you see anyone near my garden?" She stopped walking and turned around. Her smile was big, but it didn't look real. "Nope," she said. "Why? Did something happen?" I pointed at the empty spots. "Yeah, my pumpkins are gone," I said. She shrugged, like it was no big deal. "Oh, that's too bad," she said. "Maybe a raccoon got them." Then she turned and walked away, fast, like she didn't want to talk anymore. I watched her go, feeling confused. A raccoon? Maybe. But raccoons don't carry big bags. And they don't walk on 2 legs wearing sunglasses. I started to wonder. Was Karen lying? Did she know more than she was saying? I didn't want to think she'd take my pumpkins, but something told me she wasn't telling the truth. Her wave and her smile, they seemed fake now. Like she was hiding something. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my pumpkins and Karen's big bag. I got out of bed and looked out my window. The moon was bright, and my garden looked pretty in the light. But those empty spots made me sad. I decided right then I was going to find out what was happening. I wasn't going to let my pumpkins keep disappearing. If someone was taking them, I'd catch them. And if it was Karen? Well, she'd be sorry she ever messed with me. The next day, I made a plan. I'd watch my garden closer. I'd check it every morning and every night. I'd even sit by the window with my hot cocoa and keep an eye out. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to catch Karen in the act. And when I did, I'd have a surprise for her, a big, spicy surprise she'd never forget. Want to know what happened next? Stick around, because this story's just getting started. Have you ever met someone who seemed nice but turned out to be sneaky? Tell me in the comments, and stay with me, because Karen's about to get a big surprise. So, there I was, sitting by my window with my hot cocoa, watching my pumpkins like a hawk. The moon was high in the sky, and the night was quiet, except for a little cricket chirping somewhere. My garden looked peaceful, but I wasn't relaxed. Nope, I was on a mission. I wanted to catch whoever was taking my pumpkins, and deep down, I had a feeling it was Karen. That big bag she'd been carrying, it stuck in my mind like gum on a shoe. I couldn't shake it. Was she really sneaky enough to steal from me? I was about to find out. The next morning, I woke up early. The sun wasn't even up yet, but I didn't care. I pulled on my sneakers, grabbed a flashlight, and tiptoed outside. The air was cold, and my breath made little clouds in front of my face. I shined my flashlight on my pumpkins, counting them one by one. Big Bob was gone, Sunny Sue was gone, but the rest were still there: Little Pete, Fat Fred, and a few others I hadn't named yet. I sighed. No new pumpkins were missing, but that didn't mean the thief was done. I had to be ready. I went back inside and made a big cup of coffee. I wasn't going to sleep through this. I sat on my couch, right by the window, and kept my eyes on the garden. The sun started to rise, turning the sky pink and orange, just like my pumpkins. Birds chirped, and a squirrel ran across my fence. Everything seemed normal, but I wasn't fooled. I knew something fishy was going on, and I wasn't going to let it slide. Around lunchtime, I saw Karen again. She walked by my house, wearing her big sunglasses and a bright red coat. She didn't wave this time. She just kept her head down and moved fast, like she was in a hurry. I peeked out the window, trying not to let her see me. She didn't stop, didn't look at my garden, but I noticed something. She was carrying that same big cloth bag. It swung by her side, and I squinted to see if anything orange was poking out. I couldn't tell. The bag was closed tight. But my tummy did that funny flip again. I knew she was up to something. I decided to talk to my neighbor Mike. He's a nice guy with 2 kids and a little dog named Buddy. Maybe he'd seen something weird too. I walked across the street, knocked on his door, and waited. Mike opened it, holding a sandwich in one hand. "Hey," he said, smiling. "What's up?" I told him about my missing pumpkins, Big Bob and Sunny Sue, and how I thought someone was taking them. His eyes got big. "No kidding," he said. "That's crazy. Who'd steal pumpkins?" "I don't know," I said, "but I think it might be Karen." Mike laughed, like it was a joke, but then he saw my face and stopped. "Wait, you're serious?" he asked. I nodded. "She had a big bag yesterday, and I saw something orange in it. Plus, she acted weird when I asked her about it." Mike rubbed his chin, thinking. "Huh," he said. "That's strange. Karen's always been loud, but I didn't think she'd steal." "You sure?" "No," I admitted. "But I'm going to find out." Mike grinned. "Good luck, detective. Let me know if you catch her. My kids would love that story." I smiled back and said, "Thanks, Mike. I will." Then I went home, feeling a little better. Talking to Mike made me feel like I wasn't crazy. Maybe Karen really was the pumpkin thief. That afternoon, I made a sign. I got a piece of cardboard and a fat black marker and wrote, "Please don't take my pumpkins." I stuck it in the dirt by my garden, right where everyone could see it. I thought maybe if the thief saw it, they'd feel bad and stop. Or at least they'd know I was watching. I stood back and looked at my sign. It wasn't fancy, but it said what I wanted. I hoped it would work. But that night, another pumpkin went missing. I'd gone to bed late, after staring out the window for hours, and I must have fallen asleep on the couch. When I woke up, it was dark, and I ran outside with my flashlight. Little Pete was gone. The sign was still there, but Little Pete's spot was empty. I kicked the dirt, mad as a bee in a jar. The sign didn't work. Whoever was taking my pumpkins didn't care. They were bold, sneaky, and fast. That's when I saw her, Karen. It was the next evening, just as the sun was going down. I was sitting by my window again, sipping cocoa, when I spotted movement by my fence. I leaned closer, my nose almost touching the glass. There she was, creeping along like a cat. She had that big bag slung over her shoulder, and she was looking at my pumpkins. My heart started thumping loud in my chest. I held my breath, watching. Karen stopped by Fat Fred, the biggest pumpkin I had left. She looked around, left and right, like she was making sure no one saw her. Then she bent down, grabbed Fat Fred with both hands, and yanked. The vine snapped, and she stuffed him into her bag quick as a flash. I couldn't believe it. My jaw dropped. It was her. Karen was the pumpkin thief. She stood up, adjusted her sunglasses even though it was almost dark, and started walking away, whistling like nothing happened. I jumped up, spilling my cocoa all over the floor. "Oh no, you don't," I whispered. I ran to the door, threw on my jacket, and slipped outside. I didn't want her to see me yet. I stayed low, hiding behind my bushes, and watched her stroll down the street. She didn't even look back. She thought she'd gotten away with it. But I wasn't going to let her. Not this time. I followed her, quiet as a mouse. She went to her house, 2 doors down, and disappeared inside. I stood by a tree, peeking at her windows. A light came on, and I saw her shadow moving around. Then I smelled something pumpkin pie. She was cooking my pumpkins. My poor fat Fred. I clenched my fists, so mad I could have yelled. But I didn't. Yelling wouldn't fix this. I needed a plan, a smart one. I went home, my head spinning. Karen wasn't just taking my pumpkins, she was eating them too. That made it even worse. I sat on my couch, staring at the cocoa stain on the floor, and thought hard. I couldn't let her keep doing this. My pumpkins were mine, not hers. She didn't ask, didn't say please, didn't care. She acted like the world owed her everything, and I was tired of it. That's when I got my big idea. I remembered something my grandma used to do when squirrels got into her garden. She'd sprinkle hot pepper on her plants, and those squirrels would run away fast. I didn't have hot pepper, but I had something better, spicy chili oil. I'd bought a bottle at the store once, just for fun, and it was still in my kitchen. That stuff was hot, hot, hot. One tiny drop made my tongue burn for an hour. I grinned. Oh, this was perfect. I grabbed the chili oil and a little brush. My plan was simple, I'd paint my pumpkins with it. Not a lot, just enough to make them taste terrible. If Karen took another one, she'd get a big, spicy surprise when she tried to eat it. I laughed, imagining her face. She'd never see it coming. I went outside in the dark, my flashlight in one hand and the chili oil in the other. I picked a few pumpkins, ones I didn't mind losing, and brushed the oil on them, nice and thin so it didn't show. They still looked normal, all orange and shiny, but they were secret traps now. I stepped back, proud of my work. "Take that, Karen," I whispered. Then I went inside, cleaned up my cocoa mess, and waited. I didn't know when she'd strike again, but I was ready. My pumpkins weren't helpless anymore. They had a spicy shield, and Karen was in for a shock. I couldn't wait to see what happened next. The next day felt like forever. I kept peeking out my window, watching my garden. Karen walked by once, but she didn't stop. She just waved, like always, and I waved back, pretending everything was fine. Inside, I was giggling. She had no idea what was waiting for her. The trap was set, and I was the hunter now. All I had to do was wait. And that's where this part ends, friends. I caught her sneaking, I made my plan, and the spicy fun was about to begin. Want to know what happened when Karen took a bite? Stick around, because this story's getting good. One crisp October morning, I woke up with a big smile. The air was cool, the leaves were falling, and I couldn't wait to see my pumpkins. I pulled on my jacket, slipped on my shoes, and ran outside to my backyard. My pumpkins were my treasures, big, orange, and round, sitting pretty in the dirt. I loved them like they were my pets. I'd check on them every day, just to make sure they were okay. But that morning, something was wrong. I stopped in my tracks and blinked. One of my pumpkins was gone. Just, poof. Vanished. No sign of it anywhere. I scratched my head, feeling puzzled. Where did it go? I looked around my yard, thinking maybe a raccoon sneaked in and took it. Raccoons are sneaky little guys, right? They have those tiny paws and love to grab stuff. I checked under the bushes, behind the fence, even near my old wheelbarrow. Nothing. No pumpkin, no clues, no raccoon tracks. I frowned and stood there, hands on my hips. That's weird, I said to myself. I didn't understand. My pumpkins were big, too big for a little animal to carry off so fast. But I shrugged and went back inside. Maybe it was just a one-time thing. I still had lots of pumpkins left, so I tried not to worry. But then, the next day, it happened again. I went outside after breakfast, humming a little tune, excited to see my orange buddies. The sun was shining, and the air smelled like apples. I walked to my garden, and my heart sank. Another pumpkin was missing. 2 days in a row. This wasn't a raccoon. Raccoons don't come back like that, do they? I counted my pumpkins yesterday. I had 10, now I had 8. 2 were gone, and I didn't like it. I kicked a little rock in the dirt, feeling mad. Those pumpkins were mine. I planted them, I watered them, I pulled weeds for them. Who was taking them? The next day, it got worse. I ran outside first thing, hoping my pumpkins were safe. Nope. Another one was gone. Now I was down to 7. 3 pumpkins missing in 3 days. I stomped my foot and looked around, my eyes narrow. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. I started to feel a little scared, but mostly mad. My pumpkins were my hard work, my fun, my fall joy. I didn't want them disappearing like this. I decided right then I was going to figure it out. No more guessing. I'd catch the thief, whoever it was. That's when I saw her, Karen. It was later that afternoon. I was sitting on my porch, sipping some juice, keeping an eye on my garden. The sun was starting to dip low, making the sky all pink and pretty. I heard footsteps and looked up. There she was, strolling by my fence like she didn't have a care in the world. Karen, my neighbor from 2 houses down. She had her big sunglasses on, even though it wasn't bright, and a smug little grin on her face. And guess what? She was holding something, my pumpkin. It was big and orange, just like the ones I'd grown, and she was carrying it like it was hers. My mouth dropped open. I couldn't believe it. I jumped up, my juice spilling a little, and yelled, "Hey, Karen, that's mine." My voice was loud, and I pointed at the pumpkin in her arms. She stopped walking and turned to look at me. That grin stayed on her face, like she thought it was funny. She laughed a loud, sharp laugh and said, "Oh, they're just pumpkins. Don't be so stingy." Then she kept walking, not even waiting for me to say anything back. I stood there, my hands in fists, watching her go. Stingy? Me? I wasn't stingy. I shared with my friend Mike when he asked. I worked hard for those pumpkins, and she was taking them like it was no big deal. I watched her disappear around the corner, her curly hair bouncing as she went. My face felt hot, and my tummy twisted. Stingy. That word stuck in my head. I wasn't stingy, I was proud. I spent months growing those pumpkins. I planted the seeds in the spring, back when the ground was still a little cold. I dug little holes with my shovel, dropped the seeds in, and patted the dirt over them. Every day, I'd check on them, watering them with my green watering can. When the tiny green sprouts popped up, I'd cheer. "Grow, little guys, grow," I'd say. I pulled out weeds, shooed away bugs, and made sure they had lots of sunshine. Those pumpkins were my babies, and Karen didn't care. Her attitude lit a fire in me. I wasn't going to let her walk all over me like that. She acted like my garden was her store, like she could just grab whatever she wanted. I paced around my porch, thinking hard. She didn't even say sorry. She didn't ask. She just laughed and called me stingy, like I was the bad guy. That wasn't fair. I wasn't going to sit there and let her take everything I worked for. But what could I do? I couldn't just run after her and grab the pumpkin back. That might start a big fight, and I didn't want that. I needed something smarter, something sneaky. The next day, I watched my garden closer. I stayed outside all morning, sitting on a little chair by my pumpkins. I brought a book to read, but I didn't really read it. My eyes kept jumping to the fence, waiting for Karen. Sure enough, she came back. It was just after lunch, when the sun was high and warm. I heard her loud voice before I saw her. She was talking to someone on her phone, laughing about something. She walked right up to my fence, still chatting, and stopped. I peeked over my book, pretending I wasn't watching. She looked at my pumpkins, then reached over the fence and grabbed one, another big, perfect one. "Hey!" I shouted, jumping up. My book fell in the dirt, but I didn't care. Karen turned around, holding my pumpkin, and grinned again. "What?" she said, like she was innocent. "That's mine," I said, pointing. She rolled her eyes, rolled them, and said, "Relax, it's just a pumpkin. You've got tons." Then she walked off, still talking on her phone, like I was nothing. I stood there, breathing hard, my hands shaking. Tons. I didn't have tons anymore, thanks to her. She was taking them one by one, and she didn't even feel bad. I sat back down, my head spinning. Karen didn't care. She kept coming back, taking more, acting like she owned my garden. Every time I saw her, that smug grin was there, like she was winning some game. I started to notice little things about her, like how she'd walk by my house every day, always at different times, so I couldn't guess when she'd strike. Sometimes she'd wave, sometimes she'd ignore me, but she always had that look. That I'm better than you look. It made me so mad I wanted to yell. But yelling wouldn't stop her. She'd just laugh again. The next morning, I counted my pumpkins again. Down to 6 now. 4 were gone, and Karen was the reason. I knew it was her. I'd seen her twice with my own eyes. I started to feel like my garden wasn't safe anymore. Every time I went inside, I'd worry. What if she came while I was eating lunch? What if she took them all? I couldn't sit by my pumpkins all day and night. I had to sleep, eat, live my life. But Karen didn't care about that. She just kept coming, like a fox sneaking into a chicken coop. I told my friend Mike about it. I walked over to his house, knocking on his door with a frown. He opened it, his little dog Buddy barking at his feet. "Hey, what's wrong?" Mike asked. I told him everything, how my pumpkins were vanishing, how I caught Karen taking them, how she laughed and called me stingy. Mike's eyes got big. "She said that?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, and she keeps doing it. I don't know how to stop her." Mike scratched his head. "That's wild," he said. "Karen's always been loud, but stealing? That's sneaky." "I know," I said. "I worked hard for those pumpkins, and she acts like they're hers." Mike nodded. "You gotta do something," he said. "Maybe tell her to stop again." I sighed. "I tried. She doesn't listen. She just laughs." Mike grinned. "Then you need a trick. Something to teach her a lesson." I looked at him, my brain starting to buzz. A trick? Yeah, maybe that was it. I didn't want to fight her, but I could outsmart her. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Karen and her smug grin. My pumpkins were out there, all alone, and she could come anytime. I felt helpless, but then I got mad again. No way was I letting her win. She wasn't going to walk all over me forever. I sat up, a little spark in my chest. I had an idea brewing, something sneaky and spicy. I didn't know exactly what yet, but it was coming. I'd make her sorry she ever touched my pumpkins. The next day, I watched her again. She came by at dusk, when the sky was turning purple. I hid behind my bushes, peeking out. She grabbed another pumpkin, number 5 gone, and walked off, whistling. I didn't yell this time. I just watched, my mind racing. Spicy. Sneaky. Spicy and sneaky. Then it hit me: chili oil. I had some in my kitchen, hot as fire. What if I put it on my pumpkins? She'd take one, try to eat it, and bam, spicy surprise. I smiled, big and wide. Oh, this was good. This was perfect. I ran inside, grabbed the chili oil, and laughed. Karen thought she was smart, but I was smarter. She didn't care about my hard work, my feelings, my pumpkins. Her attitude made me mad, but now it was pushing me to fight back. I wasn't going to let her win. Not anymore. The tension was building, and I was ready to turn it into something fun. Something she'd never forget. Okay, so here's where things start getting really exciting. For days, I turned into a secret watcher. I'd sit by my window, peeking out at my garden, waiting for her. Karen, that sneaky pumpkin thief, didn't know I was onto her. She'd come over when the sun was going down, right at dusk when the sky turned all orange and purple. She thought I didn't notice, but oh, I did. I'd see her creeping up to my fence, quiet as a mouse, looking around to make sure no one was watching. Then she'd grab one of my pumpkins, my big, beautiful pumpkins, tuck it under her arm, and strut off like a queen who owned the world. She acted so proud, like she'd won a prize. Her curly hair would bounce, and her big sunglasses would catch the last bit of sunlight. I'd watch her walk away, her head held high, and it made me so mad I could feel my cheeks get hot. She didn't even look back. She thought she was so smart, sneaking around like that. But I wasn't going to let her keep getting away with it. Nope, not me. I was done being quiet. I was done letting her take my pumpkins like they were hers. I had to do something, and I had to do it soon. One day, I caught her doing something that made me even madder. I was outside, raking some leaves by my porch, when I heard her voice. She was loud, like always, talking to our neighbor Mrs. Lucy. Mrs. Lucy's an older lady who lives next door to Karen. She's nice and likes to sit on her porch with her cat. I peeked over my rake, pretending I was busy, but I was listening hard. Karen was standing by Mrs. Lucy's gate, holding one of my pumpkins, big and orange and perfect. She was bragging. She said, "He doesn't even use them all. They just sit there, so I figure I'll take a few. No big deal. No big deal? No big deal." Oh, that made my blood boil. I gripped my rake so tight my hands hurt. I wanted to run over and yell, "Yes, I do use them. They're mine." But I didn't. I stayed quiet, my heart thumping loud in my chest. I didn't want her to know I heard her. Not yet. She kept talking, laughing like it was a funny joke, and Mrs. Lucy just nodded and smiled. I don't think Mrs. Lucy knew Karen was stealing. She's too sweet to think bad things about people. But I knew. I knew the truth, and it made me so mad I could hardly breathe. I went back inside, slamming my door a little harder than I meant to. "He doesn't even use them all," I muttered to myself, pacing around my kitchen. That wasn't true. I loved my pumpkins. I grew them from tiny seeds, watered them every day, and watched them get big and strong. I used them for pies, for decorations, for sharing with friends who asked nicely. Karen didn't know anything about me or my pumpkins. She just wanted to take them because she could. That wasn't fair. That wasn't right. And I wasn't going to let her keep doing it. So, I started planning. I wasn't going to yell at her or chase her down the street. That wouldn't work, she'd just laugh and call me stingy again. I needed something better, something sneaky, something that would stop her for good. I sat at my kitchen table, tapping my fingers, thinking hard. What could I do? How could I catch her and make her sorry? Then it hit me: spicy stuff. Spicy stuff makes people jump and yell and run away. I remembered my grandma once told me she used hot pepper to keep squirrels out of her flowers. Maybe I could do something like that. I jumped up and ran to my kitchen cabinet. I dug around, pushing aside cans and boxes, until I found a little bottle of chili oil. It was the hottest kind I could find, bright red and spicy enough to make your tongue dance. I'd bought it once to try on some noodles, but it was so hot I only used one tiny drop. My eyes watered, my mouth burned, and I had to drink 3 glasses of milk. I grinned, holding that bottle up like it was gold. Oh, this was perfect. Karen didn't know it yet, but her pumpkin stealing days were numbered. I had a plan, and it was going to be so good. That night, I got to work. I waited until it was dark, when the stars were out and the neighborhood was quiet. I didn't want anyone to see me, not Karen, not Mrs. Lucy, not even the squirrels. I grabbed my chili oil, a little brush from my paint box, and a flashlight. I tiptoed outside, my heart beating fast with excitement. My pumpkins glowed a little in the moonlight, all orange and pretty. I felt a little bad for what I was about to do, but I had to protect them. Karen wasn't going to stop unless I made her. I picked a few pumpkins, the ones closest to the fence, where Karen always grabbed them. They were big and tempting, perfect for my trap. I dipped my brush in the chili oil, just a little, and started painting it on. I didn't use a lot, just a thin layer, so it wasn't obvious. I wanted them to look normal, all shiny and orange, like nothing was wrong. I brushed the oil on the tops, the sides, even a little on the stems. It smelled spicy, but not too strong. If Karen looked close, she might not even notice. That was the trick: she'd take one, thinking she'd won again, and then surprise. I stepped back, shining my flashlight on my work. The pumpkins looked the same, but they weren't. They were spicy traps now, waiting for Karen. I giggled to myself, imagining her face when she found out. How long would it take her to notice? Would she scream? Would she run? The suspense was killing me. I couldn't wait to see what happened. I wanted to sit there all night, watching, but I knew I had to go inside. I had to act normal, like nothing was different. That was part of the fun, letting her walk right into it. The next night, I did it again. I coated a few more pumpkins, making sure I had enough traps ready. Karen didn't come every day, but she'd be back soon, I could feel it. She was too greedy to stay away. I'd watch her from my window, hiding behind the curtains, and she'd sneak up like always. She'd grab one of my spicy pumpkins, tuck it under her arm, and strut off, not knowing what was coming. I'd sit there, biting my lip, trying not to laugh. It was like a game now, me against her. She thought she was winning, but I was one step ahead. One evening, I heard her bragging again. I was outside, sweeping my porch, when her voice floated over from Mrs. Lucy's yard. "He's got so many pumpkins," she said, loud and proud. "I took another one yesterday. He doesn't even miss them." I froze, my broom in my hand. Another one? That was number 6. I peeked over, and there she was, leaning on Mrs. Lucy's gate, smiling like a cat who ate a bird. Mrs. Lucy laughed and said, "Oh, Karen, you're funny." Funny. I didn't think it was funny. I thought it was mean. But I didn't say anything. I just swept harder, letting her words sink in. She didn't think I'd miss them. She was wrong. I missed every single one. That made me even more determined. I went inside, grabbed my chili oil, and checked my traps. The pumpkins by the fence were still there, all coated and ready. I added a little more oil, just to be sure. Karen was getting bolder, coming more often, talking about it like it was a joke. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know I was planning. Every time she took a pumpkin, every time she bragged, it made me more sure I had to stop her. And my spicy idea was the way to do it. The next day, I saw something else. I was watering my garden in the morning, giving my pumpkins a drink, when Karen walked by. She waved at me, all friendly, and said, "Nice pumpkins." I waved back, trying to smile, but inside I was squinting at her. Nice pumpkins. Yeah, she thought so. She kept taking them. She didn't stop to chat, just kept walking, but I noticed her looking at my garden a little too long. She was checking it out, picking her next target. I could tell. That wave was fake. That smile was fake. She was playing nice, but I knew the truth. I started to see more little things. Like how she'd walk by my house every day, sometimes twice, always glancing at my pumpkins. She'd slow down by the fence, her eyes sneaky behind those big sunglasses. Once, I saw her stop and stare when she thought I wasn't home. I was inside, peeking out, and she didn't know I was there. She reached over, touched one of my pumpkins, then pulled her hand back quick, like she changed her mind. She looked around, then walked away fast. That was a big clue. She was scared of getting caught, but not scared enough to stop. Every little thing she did made me madder, but it also made me smarter. I was learning her tricks. She liked to come at dusk, when it was hard to see her. She liked to grab the biggest pumpkins, the ones closest to the fence. She liked to act like she was better than me, like I didn't matter. But I did matter, and my pumpkins mattered. I wasn't going to let her win this game. My spicy traps were ready, and I was ready. The suspense was building, and I couldn't wait for the big moment. I'd sit by my window every night, watching those coated pumpkins glow in the dark. They were like little soldiers, waiting for Karen. I'd wonder, how long will it take her to notice? Will she take one tonight? Tomorrow? It was exciting, like waiting for a storm to hit. I didn't know when it would happen, but I knew it would. And when it did, oh boy, her face would be something to see. I'd giggle to myself, picturing her jumping around, yelling about the spice. She'd learn not to mess with my pumpkins. She'd learn I wasn't so easy to trick. So, there I was, watching and waiting, my plan all set. Karen kept sneaking, kept bragging, kept thinking she was the queen of my garden. But I was onto her. I had my chili oil, my traps, my secret. Every day, every night, I'd check my pumpkins, making sure they were ready. The tension was growing, and the fun was just beginning. Karen didn't know it, but she was walking right into something big. Something spicy. Something she'd never forget. Okay, friends, this is it, the big moment you've been waiting for. Everything had been building up, and now it was time for the fun to explode. One evening, I was ready. I'd been watching my garden every night, sitting by my window with my cup of hot cocoa, keeping my eyes peeled. My pumpkins were all set, coated with that spicy chili oil, shining in the moonlight like little traps. I knew Karen would come back. She couldn't stay away from my pumpkins. She was too greedy, too sneaky. And I was right there, waiting for her to make her move. It happened just as the sun went down. The sky was turning dark, with little stars starting to peek out. I was sitting by my window, the curtains pulled just a tiny bit so I could see. My heart was thumping fast because I had a feeling tonight was the night. Then I saw her, Karen. She crept over to my fence, moving slow and quiet, like a fox sneaking through the grass. She had her big sunglasses on, even though it was almost night, and that smug grin was back on her face. She didn't know I was watching. She thought she was so clever, but oh, she was in for a surprise. I held my breath as she stopped by my pumpkins. She looked around, left and right, making sure no one was there. The street was quiet, no kids playing, no cars driving by. Perfect for her sneaky plan. She reached over the fence, her hands quick, and snatched one of my shiny, oil-coated pumpkins. It was a big one, all orange and perfect, glistening with that secret chili oil I'd brushed on. She tucked it under her arm, just like always, and hurried off toward her house. Her curly hair bounced, and she walked fast, like she couldn't wait to get inside with her prize. I grinned so big my cheeks hurt. She had no idea what she'd just grabbed. I stayed by the window, counting the seconds. 1 minute passed, then 2, then 3. I sipped my cocoa, trying to stay calm, but inside I was jumping with excitement. What would happen? How long would it take? I pictured her in her kitchen, setting that pumpkin on her table, grabbing a knife, thinking she'd make a pie or something. She didn't know it was a trap, a spicy, fiery trap. 4 minutes went by, then 5. I leaned closer to the glass, my nose almost touching it, waiting for the big moment. Then it happened, a scream. It was loud, sharp, and it echoed down the street like a siren. Ah! I jumped up, spilling my cocoa all over my lap, but I didn't care. That was her. That was Karen. I ran to my front door, threw it open, and dashed onto my porch. I had to see this. There she was, stumbling out of her house 2 doors down, her face red as a tomato. She was waving her hands around like they were on fire, flapping them up and down like a crazy bird. Her sunglasses were crooked, hanging off one ear, and her mouth was open wide, yelling, "What is this?" I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. I laughed so hard my tummy hurt, and I had to hold onto the porch railing to stand up. Karen glared at me, her eyes squinting through the dusk, and I just waved at her, still giggling. "Oh, that's just a little chili oil, Karen," I shouted. "Thought you'd like a spicy snack." Her face went from red to purple, and her eyes got so wide I thought they'd pop out. She looked mad, confused, and shocked all at once. It was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. She started sputtering, coughing, and stomping her feet like an angry kid who dropped their ice cream. You did this," she yelled, pointing at me with one shaky hand. The other hand was rubbing her face, and I could see it now, the chili oil had gotten everywhere. She must have tried cutting into that pumpkin, thinking it was just another easy steal. The knife probably got all oily, then her hands, and oh no, she wiped her face with those spicy fingers. A little oil got on her lips, and that's when the fire really started. She was coughing like she'd swallowed a hot pepper whole, and her voice was all squeaky and mad. I laughed even harder, leaning on my porch, trying to catch my breath. "Yep," I called back. "That's what you get for taking my pumpkins." She stomped closer, still flapping her hands, and I could see her lips were red and puffy. "This isn't funny," she shouted. "It burns." But to me, it was the funniest thing ever. She'd been sneaking around for days, acting like my garden was hers, and now she was hopping around like a bunny on a hot stove. I didn't feel bad, not one bit. She deserved it. The neighborhood started waking up because of all the noise. The dogs down the street began barking, loud and wild, like they wanted to join the party. A few neighbors poked their heads out their doors or windows, wondering what was going on. Mrs. Lucy stepped onto her porch, her cat in her arms, squinting at Karen. "What's all this racket?" she called. Karen turned to her, still coughing, and pointed at me. He put something on his pumpkins. "It's awful." Mrs. Lucy looked at me, then at Karen, and I saw a little smile on her face. I think she figured it out. My friend Mike came out too, his kids peeking around his legs. What's happening? He asked, grinning. I waved at him, still laughing. Karen took a spicy pumpkin. I said. Mike's eyes got big, and he started laughing too. No way, he said. You really did it? I nodded, proud as could be. Yep. Chili oil hotter than the sun. Mike slapped his knee, laughing so hard he almost fell over. His kids giggled, jumping up and down, saying, "Spicy pumpkin. Spicy pumpkin." Karen didn't like that. She stomped her foot again, her face all scrunched up. "You're mean," she yelled at me. "This isn't fair." I stopped laughing for a second and looked at her. "Mean?" I said. "You've been taking my pumpkins for days. I worked hard for them, and you just grab them like they're yours." She opened her mouth to say something, then closed it fast. Her hands were still waving, trying to shake off the burn, and she looked around at all the neighbors watching. She was caught red-handed and red-faced. I could tell she didn't know what to do. She'd been so sneaky, so sure she'd never get caught, and now here she was, standing in the street, looking silly. The chili oil had done its job. She tried cutting that pumpkin, and the spicy surprise hit her hard. I pictured it in my head, her in her kitchen, slicing into it, the oil getting on her hands, then her face. She probably didn't even taste it at first, just felt the burn when it was too late. Her big plan to steal another pumpkin had gone all wrong, and now everyone knew. The dogs kept barking, and more neighbors came out. Mr. Tom from across the street leaned on his fence, chuckling. "What's that smell?" he called. "Smells like chili." I waved at him. "That's Karen's new snack," I said. Everyone laughed, even Mrs. Lucy, who usually didn't laugh at loud stuff. Karen glared at me, then at them, and I saw her cheeks get even redder if that was possible. She didn't like being the center of attention, not like this. She was used to strutting around like a queen, not hopping around like a spicy mess. She tried to talk again, but it came out all coughs and squeaks. You can't do this," she said, her voice scratchy. "Why not?" I asked, crossing my arms. "You can't take my stuff." She didn't have an answer. She just stood there, fanning her face with her hands, looking like she wanted to disappear. The oil was still burning her, and she didn't know how to stop it. I almost felt a tiny bit bad almost. But then I remembered all my missing pumpkins, her smug grin, her mean words. Nope, she earned this. I sat down on my porch steps, watching her squirm. The whole street was alive now, buzzing with laughs and whispers. "Spicy pumpkin lady," one of Mike's kids yelled, and that made everyone laugh again. Karen shot me one last glare, then turned and ran back into her house, slamming the door so hard it echoed. I could hear her coughing inside, probably running to the sink for water. Water wouldn't help much with chili oil, I knew that from my noodle mistake. She'd be feeling that burn for a while. I leaned back, grinning, feeling like a hero. Karen had been caught, and not just by me, by the whole neighborhood. She thought she could keep sneaking, keep taking, keep laughing at me. But that shiny, oil-coated pumpkin changed everything. She tried to steal it, tried to cut it, and got a big, spicy shock instead. Her hands were oily, her lips were burning, her face was red, and everyone saw it. She wasn't the queen anymore, she was the silly lady who stole the wrong pumpkin. The dogs quieted down, and the neighbors started going back inside, still giggling. Mike walked over to my porch, still smiling. "That was awesome," he said. "You really got her." I nodded. "Yep. No more pumpkin thief." Mike's kids ran up, asking, "Did she cry? Did she yell loud?" I laughed. "Oh," she yelled. And she danced around like her hands were on fire. They clapped and cheered, like I'd won a big game. And in a way, I had. I looked at my garden, my remaining pumpkins sitting there, safe at last. The trap had worked better than I'd dreamed. Karen didn't know about the chili oil until it was too late. She crept over, snatched that pumpkin, and hurried home, thinking she'd won again. 5 minutes later, that scream told the whole story. She'd been caught, and the big reveal was perfect. Her sneaky days were over, and I was the one laughing now. So, there I was, sitting on my porch steps, still grinning like a kid with a big ice cream cone. Karen had just run back into her house, slamming the door behind her, and I could still hear her coughing and sputtering inside. That scream she let out, it was the best sound ever. It bounced down the street, loud and wild, and I knew my spicy chili oil plan had worked perfectly. She'd snatched that shiny, oil-coated pumpkin, thinking she'd gotten away with it again, and oh boy, did she get a surprise. I couldn't stop giggling, picturing her in there, waving her hands like they were on fire. The neighborhood was buzzing now. The dogs had stopped barking, but the air was full of little laughs and whispers. Mike and his kids were still by my porch, clapping and cheering like I was a superhero. "You're the pumpkin protector," his little girl said, jumping up and down. I laughed and gave her a high five. "Yep, no more stealing for Karen," I said. Mike shook his head, still smiling. "I can't believe you thought of chili oil," he said. "That's so smart." I shrugged, feeling proud. "Had to do something," I said. She wouldn't stop. Mrs. Lucy was still on her porch, her cat purring in her arms. She waved at me, a tiny smile on her face. "Good job, dear," she called. That was quite a show. I waved back, my grin getting bigger. Even sweet old Mrs. Lucy liked it. I didn't think she'd laugh at something loud like that, but she did. Everyone did. Mr. Tom across the street was wiping his eyes, chuckling so hard he almost dropped his cane. "Spicy pumpkins," he yelled. "Never heard of that before." I yelled back, "It's a new recipe just for Karen." That made him laugh even more. I looked down the street at Karen's house. The lights were on, and I could see her shadow moving around inside. She was probably at her sink, splashing water on her face, trying to stop the burning. I knew water wouldn't help much. Chili oil sticks like glue, and it burns until it decides to stop. I'd learned that the hard way when I tried it on my noodles. One drop, and I was gulping milk like a baby. Karen didn't have a clue what hit her. She'd cut into that pumpkin, the oil got on her hands, then her knife, and oops, she wiped her face. That's when it got on her lips, and the real fun started. I sat there, imagining it all. She probably set that pumpkin on her kitchen counter, all proud of herself. Another free pumpkin, she might have thought. She grabbed her big knife, sliced right into it, and the oil came out sneaky and fast. It stuck to her fingers, all slippery and hot. She didn't notice at first. Maybe she thought it was just pumpkin juice. But then she wiped her hands, maybe rubbed her eyes or her mouth, and bam, fire. That scream was her figuring it out. She wasn't expecting a spicy snack, that's for sure. I giggled again, picturing her hopping around her kitchen, yelling and coughing. Her big sunglasses probably fell off, her curly hair all messy from flapping her hands. She'd been so smug, so sure she could keep taking my pumpkins forever. But not this time. This time, she picked the wrong one, and it fought back. I wished I could have seen it up close, her red face, her wide eyes, her stomping feet. But hearing that scream and seeing her run outside was good enough. Oh, it was perfect. The street started to calm down a little. Mike took his kids back home, still laughing. "Tell us if she comes out again," he said. "We want the next part of the story." I nodded. "You got it?" Mrs. Lucy went inside with her cat, and Mr. Tom waved one last time before heading in too. The night got quiet again, just the crickets chirping and a cool breeze blowing. I stayed on my porch, looking at my garden. My pumpkins were still there, the ones Karen hadn't taken yet. They looked happy, safe, like they knew I'd won. I thought about what happened. Karen crept over, just like she always did. She didn't think twice about grabbing that pumpkin. She didn't see the oil, didn't smell it, didn't suspect a thing. She hurried home, all sneaky and quick, and 5 minutes later scream. It was so fast, so funny, so right. She'd been stealing for days, acting like my garden was her playground. She bragged to Mrs. Lucy, laughed at me, called me stingy. But now she was the one looking silly, and I was the one smiling. I stood up, stretching my arms, still chuckling. I could hear Karen's coughs through her window, fainter now but still there. She was probably mad as a wet cat, pacing around her house, trying to figure out how to get back at me. But what could she do? Everyone saw her. Everyone heard her. She couldn't pretend it didn't happen. The whole neighborhood knew she'd taken my pumpkin and got a spicy surprise. She was caught red-handed and red-faced right in front of them all. I went inside, grabbed a towel, and wiped up the cocoa I'd spilled. My heart was still racing from all the excitement. I kept replaying it in my head, her creeping over, snatching the pumpkin, that scream splitting the air. It was like a movie, and I was the hero. I sat on my couch, looking out the window at her house. The lights were still on, and I wondered what she was doing. Was she drinking milk? Rubbing ice on her hands? Yelling at her pumpkin? I laughed again, imagining her talking to it like, "How could you do this to me?" The more I thought about it, the funnier it got. She'd tried cutting into that pumpkin, all ready to cook it or carve it or whatever she did with my stolen stuff. The oil got everywhere, her hands, her knife, her face. She didn't see it coming. She thought she'd won again, thought she was so smart. But I was smarter. That chili oil was my secret weapon, and it worked like magic. She sputtered and coughed, stomped her feet like an angry kid, and the dogs barked like it was a big party. It was the best trap ever. I leaned back on my couch, feeling good. Karen had been so bold, sneaking over every few days, taking my pumpkins one by one. She didn't care that I worked hard for them. She didn't care that they were mine. She just grabbed and grinned and strutted away. But that night, she picked the wrong pumpkin. She didn't know about the oil, didn't know I'd been planning, didn't know I'd been watching. 5 minutes, that's all it took for her to find out. 5 minutes from sneaky queen to spicy mess. I got up and peeked out my window one more time. Her lights were still on, but it was quiet now. No more screams, no more coughing I could hear. Maybe she'd given up, gone to bed with a glass of milk and a sore mouth. I hoped she'd learned her lesson. I hoped she'd think twice before coming near my garden again. But even if she didn't, I wasn't worried. I had more chili oil, and I'd use it again if I had to. My pumpkins were safe, and I was the winner. The big reveal was everything I'd dreamed of. Karen thought she could keep stealing forever, but I stopped her. She crept over, snatched that pumpkin, and hurried home, all smug and happy. Then scream. Out she came, red-faced, hands waving, yelling at me like I'd done something wrong. But I hadn't. I'd done something right. I laughed, the neighbors laughed, and she got caught in her own game. It was loud, it was funny, it was perfect. She'd been the thief, and now she was the joke. I went to bed that night, still smiling. The street was dark and quiet, my pumpkin safe outside. Karen's big surprise was the talk of the neighborhood, and I was the guy who made it happen. She didn't know it was coming, but I did. I'd waited, I'd watched, and I'd won. That scream was her losing, and my laughing was me winning. What a night! What a big, spicy, silly night! So, after that crazy night with Karen and the spicy pumpkin, things changed big time. It was like the whole world turned upside down in a good way. After she ran back into her house, coughing and yelling, Karen never came near my pumpkins again. Not once. She used to sneak over all the time, grabbing my big orange treasures like they were hers, but now? Nope. She stayed far away, like my garden was a big scary monster she didn't want to touch. And I was so happy about that. The next morning, I woke up with a huge smile. I jumped out of bed, ran to my window, and peeked outside. My pumpkins were still there, sitting pretty in the sunshine. No sneaky hands had taken them in the night. No Karen creeping around with her big sunglasses and smug grin. I clapped my hands and cheered to myself, yes. They're safe. It felt so good to see them all there, shining orange and happy, just like they should be. I'd won, and my garden was mine again. Word spread fast around the neighborhood like wildfire. By lunchtime, everyone was talking about what happened. I went outside to water my pumpkins, and my friend Mike came running over with his kids. Is it true? He asked, his eyes big and excited. Did Karen really get a spicy surprise? I grinned and nodded. Yep. She took one of my pumpkins last night, and 5 minutes later screamed. She ran out yelling, her face all red. Mike laughed so hard he had to sit down on my porch steps. His kids jumped around, giggling. Spicy Pumpkin Lady, they shouted. Spicy Pumpkin Lady. That name stuck. Everywhere I went, people were calling her that. Mrs. Lucy, the nice old lady next to Karen, waved at me from her porch. "Good morning, pumpkin hero," she said, petting her cat. "I heard about the spicy pumpkin lady." I waved back, laughing. "Morning, Mrs. Lucy." "Yep, she won't be back." Mr. Tom across the street leaned on his fence when I walked by. "Hey, kid," he called. "How's the spicy pumpkin lady doing today?" I shrugged and said, "Hiding, I guess." He chuckled and shook his head. "Best story I've heard in years. Even the mailman knew." He stopped by with some letters and said, "Heard you got the spicy pumpkin lady good." I nodded, proud as could be. "Sure did. Chili oil did the trick." He tipped his hat and grinned. "Smart move, buddy. Smart move." It was like I'd become famous overnight. Everyone loved the story how Karen sneaked over, grabbed that oily pumpkin, and got a big, burning surprise. They laughed and clapped me on the back, calling me a hero. A pumpkin hero. How cool was that? Karen didn't like it, though. I'd see her in her yard sometimes, watering her flowers or pulling weeds. She'd look over at me, her face all scrunched up in a scowl. Her curly hair would bounce as she turned away fast, like she didn't want me to see her looking. She didn't wave anymore, didn't say hi, didn't even smile. She just scowled, her lips tight, her eyes narrow. I could tell she was mad at me, mad at the pumpkins, mad at the whole world laughing at her. But she didn't dare say a word. Not one. She knew she'd lost, and she wasn't brave enough to start anything now. I'd wave at her sometimes, just to be nice. "Morning, Karen." I'd call, all cheery. She'd huff, turn her back, and stomp inside. It made me giggle every time. She couldn't yell at me, couldn't argue, couldn't pretend she hadn't been caught. The whole neighborhood knew what she did, stealing my pumpkins, acting like they were hers, bragging about it. And now they knew how it ended, with her screaming and dancing around like her hands were on fire. She couldn't hide from that. My pumpkins stayed safe after that. Every day, I'd go outside and count them, just to be sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, all there. No sneaky thief came near my fence anymore. I'd water them, pull weeds, and sit on my porch with my hot cocoa, smiling at them. They were mine again, all mine, and it felt so good. I'd worked hard to grow them from tiny seeds, watching them turn into big, round beauties. Karen didn't get that, she didn't care. But now she couldn't touch them, and that was justice. Real, fair justice. I even started sharing some with my neighbors, the ones who'd laughed with me that night. Mike came over one day with his kids. "Hey," he said, "any chance we could have a pumpkin for Halloween? The kids want to carve a funny face." I grinned and said, "Sure thing." I picked a nice, round one, not a spicy one, of course, and handed it over. His kids cheered and hugged my legs. "Thank you, pumpkin hero," they said. I laughed. "You're welcome. Make it a good face." They ran home, so excited, and I felt warm inside. Sharing was fun when people asked nicely, not like Karen grabbing whatever she wanted. Mrs. Lucy got one too. I knocked on her door with a small pumpkin in my arms. "For you," I said, holding it out. Her eyes twinkled, and she smiled big. "Oh, you sweet boy," she said. "I'll make a little pie. No chili oil in this one, I hope." I laughed. "Nope, all safe." She patted my arm and took it inside, her cat meowing at her feet. Even Mr. Tom got one. He said he'd put it on his porch to scare the squirrels. "No spice needed," he winked. "Just a tough-looking pumpkin." I gave him a big one, and he grinned like a kid on Christmas. Everyone loved the pumpkins, and they loved the story even more. They'd stop by my yard sometimes, just to chat. "How'd you think of the chili oil?" they'd ask. I'd tell them about my grandma and the squirrels, how she used hot pepper to keep them away. "I didn't have pepper," I'd say, "but I had chili oil, and it was way hotter." They'd laugh and shake their heads. "Genius," they'd say. "Pure genius." It made me feel smart, like I'd solved a big puzzle. And I had. Karen was the puzzle, and I figured her out. Karen stayed quiet after that. She didn't try to explain, didn't say sorry, didn't even look at my garden anymore. She'd scowl from her yard, but that was it. I didn't need her apology, though. I didn't want it. I'd won without her saying a word. My pumpkins were safe, my neighbors were happy, and she'd learned her lesson. She couldn't mess with me anymore, not with the pumpkin hero. That night with the scream, the dogs barking, the neighbors laughing, it showed her she wasn't the boss. I was. One day, I saw her talking to Mrs. Lucy by the gate. I was sweeping my porch, pretending not to listen, but I heard her voice low and grumpy. "He's so mean," she said. "Putting that stuff on his pumpkins." Mrs. Lucy chuckled. "Well, dear," she said, "you did take them first." Karen huffed and walked away, her face red again, not from spice this time, just from being mad. I smiled to myself. Even Mrs. Lucy knew the truth. Karen couldn't argue with that. My garden felt like home again. I'd sit outside every afternoon, watching the leaves fall, sipping my cocoa. The air was crisp, the pumpkins were bright, and everything was peaceful. No more worrying about sneaky hands. No more counting missing pumpkins. I'd won it back, my little patch of dirt, my orange buddies, my pride. Karen learned the hard way, don't mess with a guy who loves his pumpkins. She thought she could take whatever she wanted, but I showed her she couldn't. Not with me around. The neighborhood kept talking about it for days. Kids would ride their bikes by my house, yelling, "Spicy pumpkin lady," and giggling. Parents would wave and say, "Good job, pumpkin guy." It was like a big party that didn't stop. I'd wave back, happy as could be. Justice was served not with yelling or fighting, but with a little bottle of chili oil and a lot of laughs. Karen stayed in her yard, scowling but quiet, and I stayed in mine, smiling and proud. In the end, it was simple. She stole, I tricked, she screamed, I won. My pumpkins were safe, my friends were happy, and Karen wasn't the queen anymore. She was just the spicy pumpkin lady, a silly story everyone loved. And me? I was the guy who made it happen. The guy who loved his pumpkins and wouldn't let them go. That's justice, and it felt awesome. Okay, friends, we've made it to the end of this wild pumpkin story. It's been a big adventure, hasn't it? Karen sneaking around, me setting my spicy trap, her screaming in the street. It was loud, funny, and oh so satisfying. But now, I want to sit back with you, like we're on my porch with a cup of hot cocoa, and talk about what it all means. There's a little lesson in here, something cool to think about, and I'm excited to share it with you. So, grab a comfy spot, and let's chat. Here's the thing: sometimes, the people who think they can take whatever they want don't see the fight coming. Think about Karen. She was so sure she'd keep winning. She'd sneak over to my garden, grab my pumpkins, and strut away like she owned the whole world. She had that big grin, those fancy sunglasses, and not a worry in her head. She thought I'd just sit there, letting her take my stuff forever. She didn't think I'd do anything. She didn't think I'd fight back. But she was wrong, super wrong. I didn't yell at her. I didn't run after her, shaking my fists. I didn't even argue when she called me stingy. Nope, I stayed quiet. I watched, I planned, and I used a little spice to set things right. That chili oil? It was my secret weapon. Karen never saw it coming, not in a million years. She thought she was the smart one, but I outsmarted her with something so simple, a tiny bottle from my kitchen. And when she grabbed that oily pumpkin and got a big, burning surprise, it showed her she couldn't mess with me. Sometimes, the quiet way is the best way. That's what I want you to think about. Maybe you've got a Karen in your life too. You know, someone who takes stuff that's not theirs, or acts like they're better than everyone, or pushes you around. It could be a kid at school who grabs your pencil without asking. Or a friend who always takes the biggest piece of cake. Or even a grown-up who doesn't listen when you say stop. They're out there, those sneaky Karens, thinking they can do whatever they want. But here's the cool part: you don't have to let them. What would you do to outsmart them? That's my big question for you. I used chili oil because it was funny and it worked, but you might have your own idea. Maybe you'd hide something tricky, like a toy that makes a loud noise when they touch it. Or maybe you'd tell a teacher or a parent in a super smart way so the Karen gets caught. Or maybe you'd make a sign that says, "Hands off," and watch them squirm. Whatever it is, I'm dying to hear your ideas. Drop them in the comments below. I can't wait to see what you come up with. You're smart, and I bet you've got some awesome tricks up your sleeve. Let's think about this some more. Karen didn't expect me to fight back because I was quiet. I'm not a loud guy. I don't run around yelling or making big scenes. I just like my pumpkins, my garden, and my peaceful days. I'm the kind of person who sits on the porch, sipping cocoa, watching the leaves fall. To Karen, that made me easy to pick on. She thought, oh, he won't do anything. He's too quiet. But that's where she got it all wrong. Sometimes, the quiet ones, like me and my pumpkins, have the best surprises up our sleeves. Being quiet doesn't mean you're weak. Nope. It can mean you're thinking, planning, waiting for the right moment. I didn't need to shout to win. I just needed a little bottle of chili oil and a good idea. And when the time came, boom. Karen's scream told the whole neighborhood who was really in charge. That's the power of being sneaky smart. You don't have to be the loudest or the biggest to stand up for what's yours. You just have to be clever, and maybe a little brave too. Think about yourself for a second. Are you a quiet one? Maybe you're the kid who sits in class, listening and watching, while everyone else is talking. Or maybe you're the one who doesn't say much at recess but sees everything that happens. That's okay. That's awesome, even. Being quiet can be your strength. It gives you time to figure things out, to make a plan, to surprise everyone when they least expect it. Just like me with my pumpkins, you've got power inside you, power to outsmart the Karens of the world. Let's imagine something fun. Picture a kid at school. Let's call him Timmy. Timmy's quiet, like me. He brings a cool toy car to show his friends, but there's this bully, Jake, who always takes it and runs off. Jake's loud and pushy, like Karen, and he thinks Timmy won't do anything. But one day, Timmy gets an idea. He puts a tiny bell inside the car, a jingly little bell that rings super loud when you move it. The next time Jake grabs it and runs, the bell goes ding ding ding, all over the playground. Everyone turns to look, the teacher hears it, and Jake gets caught holding Timmy's car. Busted. Timmy didn't yell, he just used a sneaky trick, and he won. Cool, right? That's what I'm talking about. You don't need to be big or loud to win. You can be small, quiet, and smart, and still come out on top. Karen learned that the hard way. She thought she could keep taking my pumpkins because I didn't make a fuss. But I had a surprise waiting, and it changed everything. Her scream was loud, but my quiet plan was stronger. And now, my garden's safe, and she's the spicy pumpkin lady everyone laughs about. That's justice, and it feels so good. So, here's my big thought for you: don't let the Karens win. They might look tough, they might act like they're in charge, but you've got something they don't expect. You've got your brain, your ideas, your sneaky smart surprises. Maybe it's not chili oil for you, maybe it's something else, something only you can think of. Whatever it is, use it. Stand up for what's yours, even if you do it in a quiet way. The world doesn't belong to the loud ones, it belongs to the clever ones too. Let's dream a little more. Imagine you've got a treasure, like my pumpkins. Maybe it's a special book, or a drawing you made, or a toy you love. Someone tries to take it, thinking you won't stop them. What do? You could tell someone, sure, but what if you tricked them instead? Maybe you hide a note inside that says, "Caught you." Or maybe you make it look boring so they don't want it anymore. You're the hero of your story, and you get to decide how it ends. That's the fun part, you're in charge. I love that about this story. I didn't just sit there, sad about my pumpkins. I did something. I watched Karen, I made my plan, and I turned her sneaky game into my big win. She didn't see it coming, and that's what made it so great. The quiet guy with the pumpkins beat the loud lady with the sunglasses. And you can do that too. You've got your own surprises, your own tricks, your own way to shine. Don't be afraid to use them. So, what's your chili oil? What's that one thing you'd pull out to outsmart someone mean? I want to know. Tell me in the comments, I'm so excited to hear your ideas. Maybe you'd use something funny, like a whoopee cushion, or something clever, like a secret code. Whatever it is, I bet it's awesome. You're awesome. And don't forget, sometimes the quiet ones, the ones who don't make a big fuss, are the ones who win the biggest fights. This story's over, but your story's just starting. Karen's out there, scowling in her yard, and I'm here, happy with my pumpkins. But you? You're wherever you are, ready to take on your own adventure. Be sneaky, be smart, be you. The world's full of Karens, but it's full of heroes too, heroes like me, and heroes like you. So go out there, keep your treasures safe, and show them what you've got up your sleeve. I believe in you.